1. Chapter 1. Brill Wingfield sat in his dimly lit apartment, the hum of the city outside a constant backdrop. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His phone rang, cutting through the silence. He picked it up, glanced at the unknown number, and answered. "Wingfield," he said, his voice rough. "Good evening, Mr. Wingfield." The voice on the other end was distorted, robotic. Brill's eyes narrowed. "Who's this?" "Someone with a job for you. A lucrative one." "I'm listening." "There's a file. Highly sensitive. Stored in a government facility. We need you to retrieve it." Brill's fingers drummed on the armrest. "What's the payout?" $2 million. Half now, half upon delivery." He raised an eyebrow. "High stakes. High rewards." Brill paused, weighing his options. "Details?" "I'll send them to a secure drop. You'll have everything you need." He nodded, though the voice couldn't see. "All right. I'm in." "Good. You'll be contacted again soon." The line went dead. Brill set the phone down, his mind already racing. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling city. The lights flickered like stars, each one a potential threat or ally. He needed information. Fast. Brill grabbed his jacket and left the apartment. The night air was cool, a slight breeze rustling his hair. He walked with purpose, blending into the crowd. His destination, an old ally. Sarah's place was tucked away in a rundown part of town. He knocked twice, a specific rhythm. The door opened a crack, a chain still in place. "Brill," she said, her voice tense. "What brings you here?" "Need your help, Sarah." "Big job." She eyed him for a moment, then unlatched the door. "Come in." Her apartment was cluttered with tech. Computers, wires, screens. She cleared a space on the couch for him. "Details?" she asked, sitting opposite him. "Government facility. High security. Need blueprints, guard schedules, the works." Sarah frowned. "That's serious. What's in it for me?" "Cut of the pay. Plus I'll owe you." She thought for a moment, then nodded. "All right. I'll see what I can dig up." Brill leaned back, watching her work. Fingers flying over the keyboard, she pulled up schematics, security logs, personnel files. "This place is a fortress," she muttered. "You'll need more than just blueprints." "I'll manage." She shot him a look. "You always say that." Brill smirked. "And I'm still here, aren't I?" Sarah shook her head, but couldn't suppress a smile. "All right. Here's what I've got so far." She turned the screen toward him, showing detailed layouts, camera placements, guard shifts. Brill studied them intently, committing everything to memory. "This is good," he said. "Real good. Just be careful, Brill. This isn't your usual job." "I know." They spent the next few hours planning. Every detail scrutinized, every potential pitfall anticipated. By the time they were done, the sun was starting to rise. Brill stood, stretching. "I'll be in touch." Sarah nodded. "Good luck." He left her apartment, the morning light casting long shadows on the streets. The city was waking up, but Brill's day was just beginning. Back in his apartment, he went over the plan again. Every step, every move. Precision was key. One mistake, and it was over. The phone rang again. He answered immediately. "Mr. Wingfield," the distorted voice said. "Everything in order?" "Yeah," Brill replied. "What's the drop location?" "An abandoned warehouse on 8th and Vine. Be there in 1 hour." "Got it." He hung up, grabbing his gear. Guns, gadgets, everything he might need. He moved quickly, efficiently, no wasted motions. The warehouse was exactly as he expected, dark, empty, foreboding. He approached cautiously, every sense on high alert. Inside, he found a small crate. Opening it, he saw the promised advance payment and a detailed dossier. He pocketed the money and skimmed the dossier. Everything matched Sarah's intel. He was ready. Brill walked out of the warehouse, his mind focused. This job was dangerous, but he thrived on danger. The stakes were high, but so were the rewards. 2. Chapter 2. He sat in his apartment, hunched over a map of the government facility. His eyes traced the routes and security points. The weight of the job pressed down on him, but he thrived under pressure. Every detail mattered. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. He glanced at the clock. Right on time. He opened the door to see Sarah holding a small bag. "Got the gear," she said, stepping inside. Brill nodded, taking the bag and setting it on the table. He pulled out a pair of binoculars, a small drone, and several gadgets for bypassing electronic security. Everything he needed for the job. "Thanks," he said. "This should cover it." Sarah sat on the edge of the table, crossing her arms. "You sure about this, Brill? This place is a fortress." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "I've done worse." She sighed. "Just be careful." "I will." They headed out, blending into the morning rush. The facility was in a secluded part of the city, surrounded by high walls and barbed wire. Brill and Sarah found a vantage point on a nearby rooftop, concealed by an old water tower. Brill set up the binoculars, scanning the perimeter. Guards patrolled in regular intervals, armed and alert. Cameras covered every angle, their lenses cold and unfeeling. "Got a clear view," Brill muttered. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Sarah launched the drone, guiding it with precision. The small device zipped across the street, unnoticed by the guards below. Brill watched the feed on a handheld screen, taking in every detail. "Main entrance is heavily guarded," Sarah noted. 2 guards at the gate, more on patrol. Cameras everywhere. Brill nodded. "We'll need to find another way in." They observed for hours, mapping out patrol routes and security blind spots. Brill noted a maintenance entrance on the west side, less guarded but still secure. "There," he said, pointing to the screen. "That's our way in." Sarah frowned. "Still risky. You'll need a distraction." Brill grinned. "Got any ideas?" She smirked. "Leave it to me." As night fell, Brill prepared for the next phase. He suited up, checking his gear one last time. Sarah handed him a small device. "Signal jammer," she explained. "Should give you a few minutes to get past the cameras." "Thanks," he said, pocketing the device. "You ready?" Sarah nodded, her expression serious. "Let's do this." They made their way to the maintenance entrance, sticking to the shadows. Brill moved with practiced ease, every step calculated. Sarah set up her distraction, a timed explosion on the opposite side of the facility. "Ready?" she whispered. Brill nodded. "Go." The explosion rocked the night, drawing the guards' attention. Brill moved quickly, jamming the cameras and slipping through the gate. He made his way inside, heart pounding. The maintenance corridors were narrow and dimly lit. Brill moved silently, avoiding the occasional worker. He reached the main security hub, a room filled with monitors and control panels. He placed a small device on the door, waiting for the beep before entering. Inside, he found 2 guards, both focused on the screens. Brill acted swiftly, taking them out with precise blows. He moved to the control panels, inserting a flash drive Sarah had given him. The screens flickered, then went dark. "Security down," he whispered into his comm. "Proceeding to the vault." "Copy that," Sarah replied. "Be careful." Brill made his way deeper into the facility, following the route he'd memorized. He avoided patrols, his movements a blend of stealth and speed. Every step brought him closer to the vault. He reached the final corridor, the vault door looming ahead. Brill paused, taking a deep breath. This was it. He approached the door, examining the security system. A high-tech keypad and biometric scanner blocked his way. Brill pulled out a gadget, a small device designed to hack electronic locks. "Come on," he muttered, working the device. The scanner beeped and the door slid open. Inside, rows of secure cabinets lined the walls. Brill searched quickly, finding the one he needed. He inserted another device, decrypting the lock. The cabinet opened, revealing a single file. Brill grabbed it, stuffing it into his bag. He turned to leave, but a noise stopped him. Footsteps. Close. Brill slipped into the shadows, watching as a guard entered the room. The guard scanned the area, eyes narrowed. Brill held his breath, waiting. The guard turned away, and Brill struck, taking him down silently. He moved quickly, exiting the vault and retracing his steps. The return trip was tense. Brill avoided detection, using every trick in his book. He reached the maintenance entrance, slipping outside. Sarah was waiting, her eyes wide with relief. "Got it?" she asked. Brill nodded. "Let's get out of here." They made their way back to the safe house, moving through the city's labyrinthine streets. Brill kept a watchful eye, alert for any signs of pursuit. Inside the safe house, Brill set the file on the table. Sarah examined it, her fingers trembling slightly. "This is it," she said. "The key to everything." Brill nodded, but his mind was already racing. They'd gotten the file, but the real challenge was just beginning. "Decrypt it," he said. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Sarah nodded, setting to work. Brill watched her, his thoughts dark and brooding. They were in deep, and there was no turning back. The night stretched on, filled with the hum of technology and the tension of uncertainty. Heck knew the stakes were higher than ever, but he was ready. 3. Chapter 3. Wingfield sat in the safe house, tension coiling in his muscles. Sarah was hunched over her computer, typing furiously. The decrypted file was proving to be a tough nut to crack. She had gotten past the initial layer of encryption, but deeper layers required more time. Time they didn't have. "We're running out of time, Sarah," Brill said, his voice low and urgent. She didn't look up, her eyes glued to the screen. "I know, Brill. I'm working as fast as I can." He stood and paced the small room, his mind racing. They had the file, but without the decryption key, it was useless. And now, the longer they held onto it, the more likely their enemies would find them. "We need to move," he said, his eyes darting to the window. "We can't stay here much longer." Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. "I just need a bit more time. This encryption is more complex than I thought." Brill stopped pacing and looked at her. "How much more time?" "An hour, maybe 2. He nodded, grabbing his gear. "I'll stand watch outside. If anything happens, you signal me." Sarah nodded, her focus returning to the screen. Brill stepped outside, the cool night air hitting his face. He scanned the area, his senses heightened. Every shadow, every movement could be a threat. He moved to a concealed spot, blending into the darkness. His eyes swept the perimeter, watching for any signs of trouble. He felt the weight of his gun on his hip, a reassuring presence. Minutes turned into an hour. Brill's mind raced, but he remained focused. Then he heard it, the sound of footsteps approaching. He tensed, his hand moving to his gun. 2 figures emerged from the shadows, moving silently. Brill recognized them as government agents, their movements precise and deliberate. He waited, his breath steady. They were getting closer. Brill had to act. He stepped out of the shadows, his gun drawn. "Hold it," he said, his voice a low growl. The agents froze, their eyes widening. Brill moved quickly, disarming them with practiced efficiency. He knocked them out cold, dragging their bodies into the shadows. Brill wiped the sweat from his brow, his heart pounding. This was too close. He returned to the safe house, finding Sarah still working. "Got company," he said, his voice tight. 2 agents. They're down, but more could be coming. Sarah's eyes widened. "We need to move." Brill nodded. "How much longer?" "Another 30 minutes. I'm almost there." He gritted his teeth but nodded. I'll hold them off. Finish the job. He stepped back outside, his nerves on edge. He took up a new position, his eyes scanning the darkness. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. Then he saw it, a glint of metal in the moonlight. More agents moving in. Brill's heart raced. He had to buy Sarah more time. He moved silently, positioning himself behind a stack of crates. As the agents approached, he sprang into action, taking them down with precise, lethal strikes. The fight was quick, brutal. Brill's training and experience shone through. But there were more coming. Brill knew he couldn't hold them off forever. He retreated back to the safe house, locking the door behind him. Sarah, he called, his voice urgent. We're out of time. She looked up, her face pale. Got it. The file's decrypted. Brill grabbed the flash drive from her, pocketing it. Let's move. They exited the safe house, slipping into the night. Brill led the way, his senses on high alert. They moved quickly, avoiding patrols and sticking to the shadows. As they reached a safe distance, Brill turned to Sarah. Where's the rendezvous point? An old warehouse on the outskirts of town. Should be secure. Brill nodded. Let's go. They made their way through the city, their footsteps echoing in the empty streets. Brill's mind raced, planning their next move. They had the file, but now they had to deliver it. And they were being hunted. The warehouse was a hulking structure, its windows broken and doors rusted. Brill and Sarah slipped inside, finding a spot to lay low. Brill pulled out the flash drive, plugging it into Sarah's laptop. Let's see what we've got, he said. Sarah typed quickly, opening the decrypted file. As the contents appeared on the screen, her eyes widened. Oh my God, she whispered. This is huge. Brill leaned in, reading over her shoulder. The file contained detailed records of corruption and conspiracy at the highest levels of government. Names, dates, transactions. Enough to bring down powerful people. This is it, Brill said, his voice filled with a mix of awe and fear. This is what they were hiding. Sarah nodded, her hands shaking slightly. We need to get this to the right people. Brill's mind raced. The voice on the phone had wanted this file, but now he wasn't sure he could trust them. They needed a plan. Who do we trust? He asked. Sarah thought for a moment. I know a journalist. Someone who's been digging into this stuff for years. They can get this out. Brill nodded. Make the call. Sarah pulled out her phone, dialing a number. Brill stood guard, his eyes scanning the warehouse. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The call was brief. Sarah hung up, turning to Brill. They'll meet us in an hour. We need to move. Brill nodded, leading the way out of the warehouse. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. The city felt like a maze, every corner hiding potential danger. They reached the meeting point, a quiet park on the edge of town. Brill scanned the area, ensuring it was safe. They waited, tension thick in the air. A figure approached, moving cautiously. Brill tensed, his hand on his gun. But Sarah waved, recognizing the journalist. Sarah, the figure called softly. Over here, she replied. The journalist, a middle-aged man with a weathered face, approached. He looked around nervously. Do you have it? He asked. Sarah nodded, handing him the flash drive. This is it. Everything you need. The journalist pocketed the drive, his eyes wide. You have no idea how big this is. Brill stepped forward. We need to stay off the grid. They'll be coming after us. The journalist nodded. I have a safe house. You can lay low there. I'll get this out. Brill nodded, relief washing over him. Lead the way. They followed the journalist, moving through the city's back alleys. The safe house was a small, nondescript building. Inside, it was stocked with supplies and had a secure internet connection. You'll be safe here, the journalist said. I'll contact you when it's done. Brill nodded. Thank you. The journalist left, leaving Brill and Sarah alone. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their actions settling in. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice soft. Brill nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "Yeah, we did." They set up in the safe house, preparing for a long stay. Brill knew the road ahead would be tough, but they had taken a crucial step. As the first rays of dawn broke through the windows, Brill allowed himself a moment of rest. The fight was far from over, but for now they were safe. 4. Chapter 4. Brill and Sarah sat in the safe house, the quiet hum of the city outside a stark contrast to the tension inside. The journalist had taken the decrypted file to expose the corruption they had uncovered. But they knew the fight was far from over. They had stirred a hornet's nest, and now they were in the crosshairs. Brill checked his gear, his movements precise and deliberate. He needed to stay sharp. The recent encounters with government agents had rattled him, but he couldn't afford to show it. He turned to Sarah, who was busy monitoring her laptop. "Any updates?" Brill asked. Sarah shook her head, her brow furrowed. "Nothing yet. But it's only a matter of time before they trace us here." Brill nodded. "We need to be ready to move at a moment's notice." As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face paling. "It's him," she said, answering the call. "Hello." The voice on the other end was frantic. "Sarah, it's Max? They're on to us. I need to meet you now." "Where?" she asked, her voice steady despite the urgency. "Old subway station on 14th. In an hour." "We'll be there," Sarah replied, ending the call. She turned to Brill, her expression grim. "Max is in trouble. We need to help him." Brill nodded, already moving. "Let's go." They left the safe house, moving quickly through the darkened streets. Brill kept a watchful eye, scanning for any signs of pursuit. The old subway station was a few blocks away, its entrance hidden by graffiti and neglect. They slipped inside, the stale air and faint echo of dripping water enveloping them. Brill led the way, his gun drawn. They reached the platform, finding it empty. "Max," Sarah called out softly. A figure emerged from the shadows, his face gaunt and eyes wide with fear. It was Max, the journalist. He looked around nervously, then hurried over to them. "They're after me," he said, his voice a whisper. "I barely got away." "Did you get the file out?" Brill asked. Max nodded. "Yes. It's with a trusted contact. They're working on it now." "Good," Brill said. "We need to get you somewhere safe." Max shook his head. "It's too late for that. They've got people everywhere. I'm a dead man walking." Brill's jaw tightened. "We're not leaving you behind." Max's eyes pleaded with them. "You don't understand. They have resources, connections. If I stay with you, I'll only put you in more danger." Brill glanced at Sarah, who nodded reluctantly. He knew Max was right, but it didn't make it any easier. "All right," Brill said, his voice hard. "What do you need us to do?" Max handed Brill a small flash drive. "This is a backup of the file. Keep it safe. If anything happens to me, you'll still have this." Brill took the drive, slipping it into his pocket. "We'll keep it safe. I promise." Max nodded, a look of relief washing over his face. "Thank you." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed through the tunnel. Brill's head snapped up, his instincts kicking in. "We need to move. Now." They hurried back the way they came, but it was too late. Figures emerged from the darkness, blocking their path. Brill recognized the lead agent, a tall man with a scar across his cheek. He was the one from the facility. "Wingfield," the agent said, his voice cold. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble." Brill's grip tightened on his gun. "Just doing my job." The agent smirked. "And now, you're going to pay for it." Brill didn't wait for him to make the first move. He fired, hitting the agent in the shoulder. Chaos erupted as bullets flew, and echoes rang through the tunnel. Brill moved with deadly precision, taking down agents left and right. Sarah covered him, her aim steady. Max cowered behind a pillar, trying to stay out of the line of fire. "Sarah, get Max out of here," Brill shouted, taking out another agent. Sarah nodded, grabbing Max's arm and pulling him towards an exit. Brill covered their retreat, his movements fluid and lethal. But the agents kept coming. Brill knew they couldn't hold out much longer. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the inevitable. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it, a maintenance door slightly ajar. A way out. "Sarah," he called. "This way." They bolted for the door, Brill bringing up the rear. He slammed the door shut behind them, barring it with a heavy piece of metal. They hurried through the maintenance corridors, the sound of pursuit close behind. Brill led them through a maze of tunnels, finally emerging onto a quiet street. They paused, catching their breath. Brill looked at Max, who was shaking but alive. "Where do we go now?" Max asked, his voice trembling. Brill thought for a moment. "We need to disappear. Lay low until the heat dies down." Sarah nodded. "I know a place. It's off the grid. Safe." Brill nodded. "Lead the way." They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. Brill kept a watchful eye, ready for any sign of trouble. They reached a nondescript building, its windows dark. Sarah led them inside, through a series of locked doors, and into a small secure room. It was sparsely furnished, but had everything they needed. "This will do," Brill said, setting his gear down. "We'll be safe here." Max slumped into a chair, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." Brill's expression softened. "We're in this together. We'll get through it." Sarah set up her laptop, checking the news and their contacts. Brill stood guard, his mind racing. They had the backup file, but they needed to stay one step ahead of their enemies. Hours passed, the tension never easing. Then Sarah's phone buzzed. She answered quickly, her face lighting up with relief. "They did it," she said, her voice triumphant. "The story's out. It's all over the news." Brill allowed himself a small smile. "Good. That's one battle won." Max looked at them, hope shining in his eyes. "What now?" Brill's expression hardened. "Now we prepare for the next fight. They won't stop coming after us. But we're ready." Sarah nodded. "We'll take them down one step at a time." Brill looked at his companions, a sense of determination settling over him. They had uncovered the truth and exposed the corruption. But the fight was far from over. They had each other, and they had the will to see this through. No matter what came next, they would face it together. As dawn broke, casting a pale light into the room, Brill felt a sense of resolve. The road ahead would be long and dangerous, but they were ready. Whatever it took, they would fight for justice. And they would not stop until their enemies were brought to their knees. 5. Chapter 5. He didn't trust easily, and this job had made him more cautious than ever. Sarah, Max, and Brill sat in the safe house, a heavy silence hanging over them. The news was out, but the threat was still real. Brill's instincts told him it wasn't over. Max paced the room, nerves on edge. "What now? We can't just wait for them to come after us." Brill leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "We need to keep moving. Stay ahead of them." Sarah looked up from her laptop. "I've been monitoring the chatter. They're mobilizing. We need a plan." Brill nodded. "We need to split up. It'll be harder for them to track us." Max stopped pacing, his face pale. "Split up? But what if they find us?" Brill's voice was firm. "We stay in contact. Use secure channels. We can't afford to be all in one place." Sarah closed her laptop, standing. "I'll go north. I know some people who can help." Brill turned to Max. "You go with Sarah. You'll be safer with her." Max looked relieved. "All right. What about you?" Brill's eyes were steely. "I've got some loose ends to tie up." They packed quickly, each taking what they needed. Brill handed Sarah a burner phone. Use this to contact me. Only in an emergency. She nodded, her eyes serious. You too. Be safe, Brill. Brill nodded, watching as they left the safe house. Once they were gone, he turned his attention to his own plans. He had a contact, someone who might know more about the organization hunting them. He moved quickly through the city, keeping to the shadows. He reached a rundown bar, its neon sign flickering. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the murmur of low conversations. Brill spotted his contact at the bar, a grizzled man named Reggie. He approached, taking a seat next to him. Reggie, Brill said quietly. Reggie glanced at him, a smirk playing on his lips. Brill. Long time. I need information, Brill said, cutting to the chase. About the people coming after me. Reggie took a sip of his drink, his eyes scanning the room. You're in deep, Wingfield. They're serious players. Brill's jaw tightened. What do you know? Reggie leaned in, his voice low. They've got resources. Connections high up. They won't stop until you're dead. Brill nodded. He had expected as much. Who's leading them? Reggie hesitated, then sighed. There's a name that keeps coming up. Lawson. Ex-military. Ruthless. Brill filed the name away. Where can I find him? Reggie shook his head. You don't find Lawson. He finds you. Brill stood, his eyes hard. Thanks, Reggie. Reggie grabbed his arm. Be careful, Brill. These people don't play. Brill nodded, leaving the bar. He had a name, and that was a start. He needed to find Lawson, but he couldn't do it alone. He headed to another safe house, one he hadn't used in years. As he entered, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Sarah. Safe. Will contact when settled. Brill felt a small measure of relief. At least they were okay. For now. He spent the next few hours gathering intel, reaching out to old contacts. Each piece of information brought him closer to Lawson. But the more he learned, the more dangerous the picture became. Lawson was a ghost, a shadow in the underworld. But Brill had faced ghosts before. He knew how to hunt them. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Sarah. Something's off. I think we're being followed. Brill's heart skipped a beat. He dialed her number, waiting for her to pick up. Sarah, he said as she answered. What's happening? We've been moving, but I keep seeing the same car. Max is scared. Where are you? Heading north, near the old factory district. Stay there. I'm coming. Brill grabbed his gear and headed out, his mind racing. If they were being followed, it meant someone had betrayed them. He reached the factory district in record time, his eyes scanning the area. He spotted Sarah and Max, huddled in the shadows. Brill approached, keeping low. What happened? Sarah looked around nervously. We've been careful, but I'm sure someone's tracking us. Brill's eyes narrowed. Stay here. I'll check it out. He moved through the area, his senses on high alert. He spotted the car Sarah had mentioned, parked a few blocks away. He approached cautiously, his gun drawn. Inside the car, he found a tracker, its light blinking steadily. Brill's jaw tightened. Someone was leading their enemies right to them. He returned to Sarah and Max, his face grim. We need to move. Now. They followed him, moving quickly through the district. Brill led them to another safe house, one he hadn't used in years. As they settled in, he turned to Sarah. Who knew about your plans? Sarah shook her head. No one. Only you and Max. Brill looked at Max, who was pale and shaking. Max. Max's eyes widened. I swear I didn't tell anyone. Brill's instincts told him otherwise. He stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. Someone betrayed us, Max. Who was it? Max's eyes darted around, his fear palpable. I didn't. I mean. Brill grabbed his collar, pulling him close. Talk. Max broke, tears streaming down his face. They got to me. Threatened my family. I didn't have a choice. Brill released him, disgust and anger warring within him. You put us all at risk, Max. Sarah looked at Max, betrayal in her eyes. How could you? Max sobbed, collapsing into a chair. I'm sorry. I didn't know what else to do. Brill's mind raced. They needed to move, but now their enemies knew too much. He turned to Sarah. We need a new plan. Somewhere they can't follow. Sarah nodded, her face set with determination. I know a place. But it's risky. Brill's eyes were steely. We don't have a choice. They packed quickly, leaving the safe house behind. Brill led them through the city, sticking to back alleys and side streets. Sarah guided them to an old abandoned warehouse, its entrance hidden by debris. Inside, the air was musty and stale. Brill set up their gear, making sure they were secure. He turned to Sarah. We lay low here. No contact unless necessary. Sarah nodded, her eyes tired but determined. What about Max? Brill looked at the broken man, his heart hardening. We keep an eye on him. But trust is gone. Max sat in silence, his head in his hands. Brill couldn't afford to let sympathy cloud his judgment. They were in a war, and any weakness could be fatal. The night stretched on, the tension never easing. Brill kept watch, his mind racing. They had been betrayed, but they were still alive. They would fight back, no matter the cost. As dawn approached, Brill felt a steely resolve settle over him. They would find Lawson. They would take down the organization hunting them. And they would survive. 6. Chapter 6. Brill awoke to the sound of silence. In the dim light of the abandoned warehouse, shadows danced on the walls. He glanced over at Sarah, who was hunched over her laptop, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. Max sat in a corner, eyes vacant and expression drawn. Brill's jaw tightened at the sight of him. They'd been on the run for days. The betrayal still stung, but Brill knew they couldn't afford to dwell on it. They had to stay ahead of their pursuers. The news might have broken, but their enemies were relentless. Brill moved to the window, peering through a crack in the boards. The streets were quiet, too quiet. He turned back to Sarah. Any movement? She shook her head. Nothing yet. But I've been picking up chatter. They're closing in. Brill nodded, feeling the weight of their situation pressing down on him. We can't stay here. We need to keep moving. Max looked up, his eyes filled with desperation. Where can we go? They know everything. Brill ignored him, focusing on Sarah. Do you have a new location? Sarah hesitated, then nodded. There's an old cabin in the woods, about 50 miles from here. It's off the grid. We can lay low there. Brill considered it. All right. We'll need supplies and a way to get there without being seen. Sarah packed her laptop, her movements quick and precise. Max stood, his hands trembling. I'm sorry, he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Brill's eyes hardened. Sorry won't keep us alive. Stay close and do exactly as we say. They slipped out of the warehouse, moving through the shadows. The city was waking up, but Brill kept them to back alleys and side streets. They reached a small convenience store, its neon sign flickering. Brill and Sarah went inside, leaving Max to watch the street. Brill scanned the aisles, grabbing essentials, food, water, medical supplies. Sarah picked up a burner phone and a map. They paid in cash, avoiding eye contact with the clerk. Outside, Max was jittery, his eyes darting around. Brill handed him a bag. Carry this. Let's go. They moved quickly, heading towards the outskirts of the city. Brill's senses were on high alert, every sound and movement scrutinized. They reached a bus station, its faded sign barely legible. Brill bought tickets for a route that would take them close to the cabin. The bus ride was tense, the passengers oblivious to the danger lurking in the shadows. Brill kept an eye on the rearview mirror, watching for any signs of pursuit. Sarah sat beside him, her face pale but determined. Max was a few rows back, his eyes closed, his hands gripping the seat in front of him. They reached their stop and disembarked, the cool morning air a welcome change from the stale bus. Brill led them down a dirt road, the trees closing in around them. The cabin was a few miles away, and they had to move quickly. As they walked, Brill's mind raced. The betrayal had changed everything. They couldn't trust anyone now, not even their old contacts. They were on their own. They reached the cabin by midday, its weathered exterior blending into the surrounding forest. Brill pushed open the door, the hinges creaking. Inside, it was dusty and dark, but it would do. Sarah set up her laptop, using the burner phone to establish a secure connection. Brill checked the perimeter, making sure they weren't followed. Max collapsed onto a chair, exhaustion etched into his features. Brill sat across from him, his gaze unwavering. "We need answers, Max." "Who threatened you?" Max looked up, tears welling in his eyes. "It was Lawson. He knew everything about me, my family. He said he'd kill them if I didn't cooperate." Brill's fists clenched. Lawson again. The man was a ghost, but Brill had faced worse. "Did you tell him about the cabin?" Max shook his head. "No. I swear. He only knew about the city." Brill studied him, weighing his words. He wanted to believe Max, but trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. "We stay here for now. No contact, unless absolutely necessary." Sarah looked up from her laptop. "I've been monitoring the news. The story's gaining traction. People are asking questions." Brill nodded. "Good. It's a start. But we need more. We need to find Lawson and take him down." Sarah's eyes widened. "That's a suicide mission, Brill. He's protected." Brill's jaw tightened. "So was the facility. We took that down. We can do this." The room fell silent, the weight of Brill's words hanging in the air. They knew the risks, but there was no turning back now. They had to see this through. The day dragged on, tension simmering beneath the surface. Brill kept watch, his senses on high alert. Sarah worked tirelessly, gathering intel and staying ahead of their pursuers. Max stayed in the background, his guilt a constant reminder of their precarious situation. As night fell, Brill felt the exhaustion creeping in. He couldn't afford to rest, but his body was demanding it. He took a moment to sit, his mind racing. They were in deep, but they had a chance. And Brill wasn't about to let it slip away. Sarah approached, her face lit by the laptop screen. "I've got something. An old contact of mine. She might know more about Lawson." Brill's eyes narrowed. "Can we trust her?" Sarah hesitated. "I think so. But we need to be careful." Brill nodded. "Set up a meeting. But make it secure." Sarah got to work, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Brill stood, moving to the window. The forest was quiet, the darkness pressing in. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Max approached, his voice a whisper. "Brill, I'm sorry. I never wanted any of this." Brill's eyes were cold. "You made a choice, Max. Now we all live with the consequences." Max hung his head, retreating to his corner. Brill's heart hardened. He couldn't afford to be soft, not now. They were in a fight for their lives, and weakness could get them killed. The night wore on, the silence broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves. Brill kept watch, his mind racing. They had a lead, but it was thin. Lawson was a ghost, and ghosts were hard to catch. Sarah finally looked up, her face drawn. The meeting set. Tomorrow night, an old warehouse outside the city. She'll be there. Brill nodded. "Good. We move at first light. Get some rest." They settled in, the cabins creaking and groaning, a constant reminder of their isolation. Brill lay on the floor, his mind too active for sleep. He listened to the sounds of the forest, the distant calls of nocturnal animals, the wind rustling through the trees. As dawn approached, Brill felt a steely resolve settle over him. They had a lead, and they would follow it. Lawson was out there, and Brill would find him. No matter the cost. If the men chasing them wanted a fight, he had an answer for them. 7. Chapter 7. Wingfield didn't sleep. He couldn't afford to. Dawn crept into the cabin, casting long shadows on the worn wooden floor. Sarah and Max were finally resting, their bodies slumped in uneasy slumber. Brill sat at the table, his eyes fixed on the map spread out before him. The old warehouse was circled in red, their next destination. He checked his gear, a compact pistol, a silent submachine gun, and a few grenades. Brill believed in being prepared. He glanced at the clock. Time to move. Sarah, Max, he said, his voice low but commanding. Sarah stirred first, rubbing her eyes and looking around. Max followed, his movements slow and weary. Brill didn't waste time with small talk. We need to leave. Now. Sarah nodded, already packing up her laptop. Max dragged himself to his feet, still haunted by guilt. Brill kept his emotions in check. They couldn't afford any slip-ups. They left the cabin, the cold morning air biting at their faces. Brill led the way through the forest, every sense on high alert. They reached the road, and found an old pickup truck Brill had hidden the night before. He got behind the wheel, Sarah beside him, Max in the back. The drive was tense, the silence heavy. Sarah kept her eyes on the road, but Brill could see the worry etched on her face. Max stared out the window, lost in his thoughts. Brill focused on the mission. They had a lead, and he wouldn't let it slip away. The warehouse loomed ahead, a relic of a bygone era. It was surrounded by a chain-link fence, the gates rusted and hanging open. Brill parked the truck a few blocks away, hidden from view. We go in quiet, Brill said, checking his weapons. No unnecessary risks. They moved silently, sticking to the shadows. Brill led the way, his eyes scanning for any signs of movement. The warehouse was dark, its windows boarded up. Brill found a side entrance, the door slightly ajar. He motioned for Sarah and Max to stay close. They slipped inside, the darkness enveloping them. Brill switched on a small flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom. The warehouse was empty, its vast interior filled with discarded machinery and crates. Stay sharp, Brill whispered, moving deeper into the building. They reached the center of the warehouse, where an old desk stood under a broken skylight. Brill saw a figure sitting behind it, a woman in her late 30s, her eyes cold and calculating. Sarah, the woman said, her voice echoing in the empty space. Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady. Emma. It's been a long time. Emma stood, her gaze flicking to Brill and Max. I didn't expect you to bring company. Brill's grip tightened on his gun. We need information. About Lawson. Emma's eyes narrowed. Lawson is dangerous. You don't just ask about him. Brill stepped closer, his voice hard. We don't have a choice. He's coming for us. Emma studied him, then sighed. All right. But it's going to cost you. Brill was about to respond when he heard a noise behind him. He turned, his gun ready, but it was too late. Figures emerged from the shadows, weapons drawn. Brill recognized the lead agent, the same scarred man from before. Wingfield, the agent said, a smug smile on his face. You walked right into our trap. Brill's heart pounded. They had been set up. He glanced at Emma, who looked away, guilt and fear in her eyes. Brill cursed under his breath. He should have seen this coming. Drop your weapons, the agent ordered. Brill hesitated, then slowly lowered his gun. Sarah and Max followed suit. The agents moved in, securing their hands with zip ties. Brill's mind raced, searching for a way out. The lead agent stepped closer, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. You've been a thorn in our side for too long, Wingfield. It's time to end this. Brill stared back, his eyes cold. You'll have to kill me first. The agent laughed. Oh, we plan to. But not before we get what we need. Brill's blood ran cold. They didn't know about the backup file, but they would torture him for information. He couldn't let that happen. The agents led them out of the warehouse, the morning light blinding after the darkness inside. Brill glanced at Sarah and Max, their faces pale with fear. He needed to keep them safe, no matter the cost. They were forced into a black van, the doors slamming shut behind them. Brill's mind raced, planning their next move. He had to stay calm, wait for the right moment. The van rumbled to life, heading towards an unknown destination. Brill felt the tension in the air, the anticipation of violence. He shifted his hands, testing the strength of the zip ties. They were tight, but not unbreakable. He glanced at Sarah, her eyes wide with fear. "Stay close," he whispered. "We'll get out of this." She nodded, her expression determined. Max sat in silence, his head bowed. Brill knew he had to act fast. Their lives depended on it. The van stopped, and the door swung open. They were dragged out, blinking in the harsh sunlight. Brill recognized the place, a secluded compound surrounded by high walls. He had been here before, during another mission. It was a torture site. They were marched inside, the cold concrete walls closing in. Brill felt the weight of his situation pressing down on him. He had to stay strong, find a way to protect Sarah and Max. The lead agent pushed him into a small room, the door slamming shut behind him. Brill's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and he saw a figure standing in the corner. "Lawson." "Wingfield," Lawson said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "I've been expecting you." Brill didn't flinch. "Lawson, I should have known you were behind this." Lawson smiled, a predator's smile. "You've been a thorn in my side for too long. It's time to remove you." Brill's eyes narrowed. "You won't get anything from me." Lawson stepped closer, his eyes gleaming. "Oh, I think I will. Everyone has a breaking point." Brill felt a surge of anger, but he kept his face impassive. "Do your worst. I won't break." Lawson chuckled. "We'll see about that." He turned to the lead agent. "Take him to the interrogation room. And bring his friends. We'll start with them." Brill's heart pounded. He had to act now. As the agent reached for him, Brill moved. He twisted his hands, the zip ties cutting into his skin, but they snapped. He lunged at the agent, his fist connecting with the man's jaw. Chaos erupted. Brill grabbed the agent's gun, firing at the other guards. Sarah and Max ducked for cover, the room filled with the sound of gunfire. Brill fought with a cold fury, his movements precise and deadly. Lawson retreated, a look of surprise and anger on his face. Brill knew he couldn't let him escape. He pursued, his eyes locked on his target. Lawson reached a door, but Brill tackled him, the two men crashing to the ground. They grappled, each trying to gain the upper hand. Brill's training kicked in, and he delivered a series of brutal blows, knocking Lawson unconscious. Brill stood, breathing heavily. He turned to Sarah and Max, who were shaken but unharmed. "We need to go. Now." They moved quickly, navigating the maze of corridors. Brill led the way, his gun ready. They reached the exit, the fresh air a welcome relief. Brill spotted a car parked nearby, its keys still in the ignition. They piled in, Brill taking the driver's seat. He started the engine, the car roaring to life. They sped away, leaving the compound behind. Brill's mind raced, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He glanced at Sarah, who was shaking but determined. "We did it," she said, her voice trembling. Brill nodded, his eyes on the road. "We're not out of the woods yet. But we're one step closer." Max sat in the back, his face pale. "What now?" Brill's eyes hardened. "We regroup. And we take the fight to them." They drove in silence, the weight of their situation pressing down on them. Brill knew the road ahead would be dangerous, but he was ready. They had survived the ambush, and now it was time to strike back. As the city faded into the distance, Brill felt a steely resolve settle over him. 8. Chapter 8. Wingfield stood in the shadows, staring at the nondescript building in front of him. The hacker's den. Sarah had traced the signal to this location, and now they had to breach it. He turned to his companions. Sarah's face was set in grim determination, her fingers twitching as if already working on a keyboard. Max looked jittery, still reeling from the ambush. "We go in quiet," Brill said, his voice barely a whisper. "In and out before they know what hit them." Sarah nodded. Max swallowed hard but said nothing. Brill checked his gear one last time, his silenced pistol, a knife, and a few gadgets Sarah had rigged up. He glanced at her. She was already working on her tablet, trying to disable the security system. "Give me a minute," Sarah said, her voice tense. Brill scanned the area. The building was in a rundown part of the city, surrounded by abandoned warehouses and graffiti-covered walls. It was perfect for hiding illegal activities. He kept an eye on the street, making sure no one was watching. Sarah let out a breath. "Got it. Cameras are down. But we have to move fast. They'll notice soon." "Let's go," Brill said, leading the way. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. Brill reached the entrance and tested the door. Locked. He motioned for Sarah, who pulled out a small device and started working on the lock. It clicked open in seconds. Inside, the building was dark and silent. Brill moved first, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The hallway stretched out before them, lined with closed doors. He motioned for Sarah and Max to follow. They crept down the corridor, every step deliberate. Sarah pointed to a door at the end of the hall. "That's where the signal's coming from. The main server room." Brill nodded and moved forward. They reached the door, and he pressed his ear against it. Faint voices on the other side. He glanced at Sarah. She nodded, her face set. Brill pushed the door open and slipped inside. The room was filled with computer screens and servers, the air humming with the sound of machines. Two men sat at a table, engrossed in their work. They looked up, surprise flashing across their faces. Before they could react, Brill moved. He crossed the room in a few quick strides, his silenced pistol taking down the first man with a soft thud. The second man started to rise, but Brill was faster. He grabbed him by the throat, slamming him against the wall. "Where's the data?" Brill hissed, his voice cold. The man's eyes widened with fear. I don't know what you're talking about." Brill tightened his grip. "The file. Where is it?" Sarah moved to the nearest computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "I'm in. Give me a minute." Brill kept his eyes on the man, his grip unyielding. "You have 10 seconds to tell me where the data is, or I'll make sure you never speak again." The man gulped. Okay. It's on the main server. But it's encrypted. You'll never get it." Sarah looked up, her eyes sharp. "Watch me." Brill released the man, who slumped to the floor, gasping for breath. He moved to Sarah's side, watching as she worked. The screens filled with lines of code, her fingers a blur. Max hovered near the door, his eyes darting around. Brill kept an eye on him, making sure he didn't do anything stupid. "I'm in," Sarah said, her voice triumphant. "I've got the data. But we need to move. They'll know we're here any second." Brill nodded. "Copy everything. Let's go." Sarah worked quickly, transferring the files to an external drive. Brill turned his attention back to the man on the floor. "Who do you work for?" The man shook his head. "I don't know. We just get orders." Brill's eyes narrowed. "You're lying." The man's eyes filled with panic. "I swear. They contact us through encrypted channels. We don't know who they are." Sarah finished, pulling the drive from the computer. "Got it. Let's move." Brill nodded and turned to leave. But the man on the floor lunged at him, a knife in his hand. Brill sidestepped, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it behind his back. The knife clattered to the floor, and Brill shoved the man away. "Don't make me kill you," Brill said, his voice icy. The man crumpled, clutching his arm. Brill turned to Sarah and Max. "Go. Now." They moved quickly, exiting the room and retracing their steps. Brill kept his senses sharp, listening for any signs of pursuit. They reached the entrance, slipping outside into the cool night air. "Where's the car?" Max asked, his voice shaky. "2 blocks over," Brill said. "Keep moving." They stuck to the shadows, making their way to the car. Brill scanned the area, making sure they weren't being followed. They reached the car, and Brill got behind the wheel. Sarah and Max piled in, and Brill started the engine. They drove in silence, the tension heavy in the air. Brill kept his eyes on the road, his mind racing. They had the data, but they weren't safe yet. Sarah plugged the drive into her laptop, her face illuminated by the screen's glow. "I need to decrypt this. It's going to take time." Brill nodded, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "Do what you need to do. We'll find a safe place to lay low." Max shifted in his seat, his eyes darting around. "What if they find us?" Brill's eyes were cold. "They won't. And if they do, we'll be ready." They drove for hours, putting distance between themselves and the hacker's den. Brill found an old motel on the outskirts of a small town. He parked the car and led Sarah and Max inside. The place was run down, but it would do. They got a room, and Brill checked the locks and windows. Satisfied, he turned to Sarah. "How's it going?" Sarah was already working, her laptop open on the small table. "It's encrypted with multiple layers. This is going to take time." Brill nodded. "Keep at it. We'll stand guard." Max paced the room, his nerves frayed. Brill watched him, understanding the fear, but knowing they couldn't afford to lose focus. Hours passed, the tension growing. Sarah worked tirelessly, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Brill and Max took turns keeping watch, their senses on high alert. Finally, Sarah let out a breath. "I've got it. The encryption is breaking down." Brill moved to her side, his eyes on the screen. "What do we have?" Sarah's eyes widened as the files opened. "This is it. Everything. Names, dates, locations. It's all here." Brill felt a surge of triumph. "Good. Copy everything. We need to move again. They'll come looking for us." Sarah worked quickly, transferring the decrypted files to multiple drives. Brill packed their gear, ready to move at a moment's notice. Max stood by the door, his eyes darting around. They left the motel, moving quickly. Brill's mind was already planning their next steps. They had the data, but they needed to use it wisely. They drove through the night, heading towards another safe house. Brill's mind raced, the weight of their situation pressing down on him. They had a chance to strike back, but it would be dangerous. As they neared their destination, Brill glanced at Sarah. "You did good." She nodded, her face set with determination. "We're not done yet." Brill knew she was right. They had a long road ahead, but they were ready. Together, they would face whatever came next. And they would not go down without a fight. They reached the safe house, an old farmhouse hidden in the hills. Brill parked the car and led them inside. The place was stocked with supplies, a haven in the storm. They settled in, preparing for the next phase. Brill stood by the window, staring out at the dark landscape. They had made it this far, but the real battle was just beginning. He felt a steely resolve settle over him. They would find Lawson and dismantle the organization hunting them. Sarah joined him, her eyes scanning the horizon. "We'll get through this." Brill nodded, his eyes hard. "Yes, we will." 9. Chapter 9. Brill stared at the farmhouse walls. He hated this feeling, trapped, hunted. Sarah and Max were asleep in the other room, exhaustion finally overtaking them. Brill, though, couldn't rest. Too much at stake. He moved to the window, scanning the dark hills outside. Quiet, too quiet. He turned back to the kitchen table, where maps and files lay scattered. Sarah had decrypted everything. The data held the key to taking down Lawson and his shadowy organization. Names, dates, operations, all laid bare. Brill knew they had a chance to strike back, but they needed a plan. A good one. The first light of dawn crept into the room. Brill pulled out a burner phone, dialed a number, and waited. A gruff voice answered. "Yeah." "It's Wingfield," Brill said. "I need a favor." The voice on the other end paused. "What kind of favor?" "I need a team," Brill replied. "Good people. Trustworthy. We're going after Lawson." A low whistle. "That's a tall order. You sure about this?" "Positive," Brill said, his tone hard. "You in or not?" Another pause. "All right. I'll make some calls. Meet me at the usual place in 3 hours." Brill hung up, his mind already working through the logistics. He moved to the other room, gently shaking Sarah awake. "Sarah," he said quietly. "We need to go. Now." She blinked, disoriented, then nodded, pushing herself up. Brill moved to Max, who was already stirring. "Where to?" Max asked, his voice groggy. "Meeting an old contact," Brill said. "Get your things." They packed quickly, moving with a practiced efficiency. Brill led them outside, where the old pickup truck waited. He checked the area one last time before they climbed in. The drive was tense, silent. Brill kept his eyes on the road, scanning for any signs of trouble. They reached the rendezvous point, a rundown diner on the edge of a small town. Brill parked in the back, away from prying eyes. Inside, the diner was almost empty. A few truckers, a waitress, and his contact, a burly man named Cole, sitting in a corner booth. "Wingfield," Cole greeted, nodding at Sarah and Max. "This your crew?" "Part of it," Brill replied, sliding into the booth. "What do you have for me?" Cole leaned back, a calculating look in his eyes. "Got a few guys willing to help. Ex-military, like us. They know the risks." "Good," Brill said. "We need gear. Weapons, explosives, everything." Cole raised an eyebrow. "Going all out, huh?" Brill's eyes were cold. "This is our shot. We don't get another." Cole nodded, pulling out a notepad. "I'll get you what you need. But it'll cost." "Money's not an issue," Brill said. "Just get it done." Cole scribbled down a list. "Give me a few hours. Meet back here at noon." Brill stood, signaling to Sarah and Max. "We'll be here." They left the diner, Brill's mind racing with possibilities. They needed a secure place to plan. He spotted a motel across the street and led them there. They rented a room, and Brill spread the maps and files across the small table. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "Here's the plan." Sarah and Max leaned in, listening intently. Brill pointed to a map of the city, where Lawson's main operations hub was marked. "This is our target," Brill said. "Lawson's base of operations. He's got security, but we have an edge. We know the layout." Sarah nodded, her eyes sharp. "What's the approach?" Brill outlined the strategy. "We go in after dark. Cole's team will create a diversion at the north entrance. We'll hit the south side, where security's lighter. Once inside, we split up. Sarah, you head to the control room. Max and I will clear the main floor." Max swallowed hard but nodded. Brill continued, detailing their escape route and contingencies. "Any questions?" Brill asked, looking at his team. Sarah shook her head. "Got it." Max hesitated, then nodded. "I'm ready." "Good," Brill said, his voice resolute. "We'll regroup at noon." The hours passed slowly. Brill couldn't shake the tension in his chest. They had one shot, and failure wasn't an option. Noon came, and they returned to the diner. Cole was waiting, a duffel bag at his feet. "Everything you asked for," Cole said, pushing the bag towards Brill. "You sure about this?" Brill nodded. "Positive." Cole's eyes hardened. "Good luck, Wingfield. You're gonna need it." They returned to the motel, laying out the gear on the bed. Guns, grenades, silencers, everything they needed. Brill checked each piece, ensuring everything was in working order. "Gear up," Brill said. "We move in an hour." They donned their equipment, each movement precise and practiced. Brill felt a familiar calm settle over him. The calm before the storm. They reached the edge of the city as the sun dipped below the horizon. Brill led them through the back streets, avoiding patrols and cameras. They reached the rendezvous point where Cole and his team were waiting. "Diversion set," Cole said. "Give us 10 minutes." Brill nodded. "Good. Stay sharp." Cole's team moved out, heading towards the north entrance. Brill waited, watching the seconds tick by. At exactly 10 minutes, explosions rocked the air, followed by gunfire. "Move," Brill hissed, leading Sarah and Max towards the south side. They reached the fence, cutting through the links and slipping inside. Brill took point, his silenced pistol ready. They moved quickly, reaching the building's entrance. Brill picked the lock, and they slipped inside. The hallways were dimly lit, the sound of distant alarms echoing through the building. Brill led the way, every sense on high alert. They reached a junction, and Brill motioned for Sarah to split off. "Control room's down that hall," he whispered. "Go." Sarah nodded, moving silently down the corridor. Brill and Max continued towards the main floor. They reached the door, and Brill paused, listening. Voices inside. Brill kicked the door open, his gun ready. He fired, dropping the nearest guards before they could react. Max followed, his movements tense but controlled. They cleared the room, moving with deadly efficiency. Brill checked the bodies, making sure they were down. "We're clear." Max nodded, his face pale but determined. Brill moved to the next door, leading them deeper into the building. They encountered more resistance, but Brill's training took over. Each shot was precise, each movement calculated. They reached the main office, where Lawson's lieutenants were gathered. Brill kicked the door open, his gun raised. "Hands up," he barked. The men inside froze, eyes wide with fear. Brill moved quickly, securing the room. He turned to Max. "Watch them," Brill said. "No one moves." Max nodded, his gun trained on the lieutenants. Brill moved to the desk, rifling through papers and files. He found what he was looking for, a ledger detailing Lawson's operations. "We've got it," Brill said, his voice triumphant. Max's eyes widened. "What now?" Brill's eyes were cold. "We take down Lawson." They regrouped with Sarah, who had successfully taken control of the building's security system. "I've locked them out," she said. "We're clear." "Good," Brill said. "Let's finish this." They moved through the building, taking out any remaining guards. Brill felt a grim satisfaction as they dismantled Lawson's operation piece by piece. They reached the central office, where Lawson was waiting, a gun in his hand. "Wingfield," Lawson sneered. "I should have known." Brill's eyes were hard. "It's over, Lawson. Give it up." Lawson laughed, a cold, bitter sound. "You think you've won? This is just the beginning." Brill's grip tightened on his gun. "Drop it. Now." Lawson's eyes gleamed with defiance. "You don't have the guts." Brill moved without hesitation, firing a single shot. Lawson dropped to the floor, clutching his leg, blood pooling around him. Brill stepped forward, his eyes cold. "Who's next in command?" Brill demanded. Lawson gritted his teeth, his face pale. "You'll never find them all." "We'll see about that," Brill said, turning to Sarah and Max. "Let's go." They left the building, the weight of their victory heavy on their shoulders. Brill knew the fight wasn't over, but they had struck a critical blow. They moved quickly, leaving the city behind. They drove into the night. Step 1 was done. Next was the hard part. 10. Chapter 10. Wingfield drove through the night, the dark road stretching out before them. Sarah and Max sat in the back seat, the weight of their mission heavy on their faces. Brill kept his eyes on the road, his mind sharp. The information they'd extracted from Lawson's base led them to this moment. The final confrontation was at hand. "We're close," Brill said, his voice low. Sarah leaned forward. "What's the plan?" Brill glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "We hit them hard and fast. No time to hesitate. Lawson's backup headquarters is heavily fortified, but we have surprise on our side. Max fidgeted. Are we sure about this? We're walking into a lion's den. Brill's grip tightened on the wheel. We don't have a choice. This ends tonight. They drove in silence, the tension palpable. Brill's thoughts raced. They had come too far to fail now. The final showdown was imminent, and there was no turning back. They reached the outskirts of the city, where an abandoned industrial complex loomed in the distance. Brill parked the car and turned to his team. Here's the layout, he said, spreading a map on the hood of the car. Lawson's backup headquarters is underground, accessible through this building. There are 2 main entrances, heavily guarded. We'll split up. Max, you create a diversion at the north entrance. Sarah and I will infiltrate from the south. Max nodded, his face set with determination. Got it. Sarah checked her gear, her fingers deft and sure. I'll disable the security system once we're inside. Brill gave them a hard look. Stay sharp. We move in 5. They moved quickly, sticking to the shadows. Brill led Sarah to the south entrance while Max headed north. The air was thick with tension, every sound magnified in the silence. Brill reached the entrance, a steel door with a keypad. Sarah worked on the lock, her fingers flying over the device. The door clicked open, and they slipped inside. The corridor was dimly lit, the walls lined with security cameras. Brill moved first, his silenced pistol ready. Sarah followed, her eyes scanning for threats. They reached a junction where Brill paused, listening. Max should be starting the diversion any second, Sarah whispered. As if on cue, an explosion echoed through the building, followed by gunfire. Brill nodded. That's our signal. Move. They advanced down the corridor, encountering sporadic resistance. Brill's movements were precise, each shot lethal. Sarah disabled the security systems, clearing their path. They reached the central hub, a large room filled with monitors and computers. Brill took down the guards, securing the area. Sarah moved to the main console, her fingers a blur. I'm in, she said. I'm downloading everything. Brill scanned the room, his senses on high alert. Hurry. We don't have much time. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, growing louder. Brill took cover, his gun trained on the door. The first guard stepped in, and Brill fired, dropping him instantly. More guards followed, but Brill was ready, each shot finding its mark. Sarah's voice broke through the chaos. Download complete. Let's move. Brill nodded, reloading his pistol. We need to find Lawson. He won't go down without a fight. They moved deeper into the complex, following the map Sarah had decrypted. They reached a heavily reinforced door, the final barrier between them and Lawson. Stand back, Brill ordered, planting explosives on the door. He detonated the charge, the door blowing inward with a deafening roar. They rushed inside, guns at the ready. Lawson stood at the far end of the room, surrounded by his lieutenants. His face twisted into a sneer. Wingfield, Lawson spat. I underestimated you. Brill's eyes were cold. It's over, Lawson. Surrender now, or we end this the hard way. Lawson laughed, a hollow sound. You think you've won? You have no idea what you're up against. Brill advanced, his gun trained on Lawson. Last chance. Lawson's hand moved to his belt, pulling out a small device. You may kill me, Wingfield, but you'll never stop what's coming. He pressed the button, and the room filled with the sound of alarms. Brill's heart sank. Lawson had triggered a failsafe. Sarah, get out of here. Brill shouted, moving towards Lawson. Sarah hesitated. Brill, we need to go. Brill shook his head. Not without him. Lawson's lieutenants moved, but Brill was faster. He fired, each shot finding its target. The room erupted into chaos, gunfire and screams filling the air. Brill reached Lawson, grabbing him by the collar. What did you do? Lawson's eyes gleamed with madness. The whole complex is rigged to blow. You're too late. Brill's blood ran cold. Sarah, now. Sarah bolted for the door, Brill dragging Lawson behind him. They sprinted down the corridors, the building shaking with explosions. They reached the exit, the night air a welcome relief. Max was waiting, his eyes wide with fear. What happened? No time, Brill barked. Move. They ran for the car, the building behind them engulfed in flames. Brill threw Lawson into the back seat, and they sped away, the explosion lighting up the sky behind them. Brill's heart pounded, adrenaline surging through his veins. They had Lawson, but at what cost? He glanced at Sarah, her face pale but determined. We did it, she said, her voice trembling. Brill nodded, his grip tight on the wheel. This isn't over. Lawson's just the beginning. We have to dismantle the entire network. Lawson laughed, a harsh grating sound. You'll never succeed. There are others. More powerful than me. Brill's eyes were hard. We'll see about that. They drove into the night, the road stretching out before them. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. Brill knew they faced a long, dangerous path, but they were ready. As they disappeared into the darkness, Brill's resolve solidified. They would hunt down every last member of Lawson's organization. They would bring justice to those who thought they were untouchable.